Good morning, and thank you for joining us in today's panel, our discussion today. So my name is Martel Dials. I'm with J.E. Dunn Construction. I am the Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the West Region. In today's panel, we're going to be talking about improving equity in public infrastructure. Our discussion will include topics on how to ensure equity in public infrastructure projects, how and why equity in public infrastructure is vital to historically underrepresented communities, and the efforts that are being made to address the exclusion in these areas. So today we have a great panel here to discuss these topics. So quick housekeeping note, of course, if you guys have any questions for our panelists, of course, afterwards outside in the hall, they're going to be here to field any questions and other conversations that you may have. So let's get started. Let's have our panelists introduce themselves, and we'll start with Ms. Deb Turner. Deb Turner.
Good morning. I'm Deb Turner. I'm with the City and County of Denver in the Department of Infrastructure and Transportation. I'm actually in the transportation aspect of that, so we oversee all the publicly funded transportation projects. I've been with the City and County of Denver for about 7.5 years in leadership roles, but have about 25 years in the both vertical and horizontal industry experience in program and project management, from basically planning through closeout of projects. 16 years in municipal government. My current role works outside of, or at the administrative level of the transportation group. So I help with strategic planning and facilitation of projects and programs, also efficiencies and processes. We also remove barriers for our teams. We look for innovative ways to deliver projects as we have resource issues, and continue to look for new ways to involve equity in our planning and processes. We just finished Denver Moves Everyone, which is our kind of a strategic transportation plan, which uses equity across all of our prioritization of our projects moving forward through 2050, which is a great deal for Denver, as we haven't had an update to our strategic plan for many, many years. So we've identified all 6,000 projects that are still across Denver that need to be funded. So yes, that's me. Thank you.
Ms. Julia?
Hi, everyone. Hello? Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Julia Masters. I work for the State of Colorado Department of Local Affairs, specifically in the Colorado Resiliency Office. The Department of Local Affairs, or DOLA, is set up to support local governments and communities throughout Colorado in accessing funding, capacity building, and technical assistance. My role specifically, I am the program manager for the Microgrids for Community Resilience Grant Program, which is a new state program that was passed through the legislature a few years back. We're supporting rural parts of the state and building out energy infrastructure to make them more resilient. And it's been a really interesting process, learning and talking to rural cooperatives and municipal utilities, and kind of thinking about how to best support, putting resources in front of those parts of the state. So I'm really excited to have this discussion with you all today. And I'll stop there.
Awesome. Marie-Ann Jepkin?
Hi, my name is Marihelika Deep. I'm with the City of Mesa, Arizona, and I'm happy to be here. I was born in Bogota, Colombia, and I have been with the City of Mesa since 2005. Before, I worked 5 years at the Arizona Department of Transportation. Currently, I'm the Transportation Projects Coordinator, and what I do is I help manage their capital improvement project, as well as the ALCP, that is the Arterial Life Cycle Program, and that has a component that is regional funding. So I do a lot of collaboration and management and reporting back to our regional funding partners, as well as I work with any grant funding projects that transportation has to deal with. So I also coordinate with ADOT, that is the Arizona Department of Transportation, with Federal Highways, and now we got a grant from the USDOT for our Safe Streets for All. So we're developing a safety action plan, and I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. All right.
Hello.
Sadie.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Sadie Martinez. I'm a Access and Functional Needs Coordinator under the Colorado Division of Public Safety, Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Easily said, Office of Emergency Management for the state of Colorado. I look to serve to ensure people who are under-resourced or underserved, people with access and functional needs, and people with disabilities are included in the base plan versus a plan for and or a plan after, so that we could reach as much community and have equity and inclusion during the bad day. And so I use a framework, a memory tool framework that we'll talk about shortly.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. And so let's get started. First question is going to be for Julia. When it comes to feedback and partnership with from communities and participation from residents regarding energy resilience and infrastructure, how critical is it to get community feedback and buy-in when starting a project or program or strategy in those areas in which you serve?
Great, thanks. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the grant program I help administer is specifically for rural parts of the state, which lots of us know typically might have less capacity or just less awareness of the potential opportunities out there. So from the jump, what us at the state took as our mandate with this grant program is to really cater it to be able to be most impactful to communities. So we've done that in a few different ways. One of them is we're requiring letters of support and kind of community buy-in from the applicants when they're applying. So we're really looking for that outreach and kind of beginnings of discussions to have been done before the applicants submit to us, to really let us know that there is broad support for these projects and the prioritization of those projects are representative of the needs of the community. We've also been supporting through requiring these projects to be tied to anchor institutions. So if you think about microgrids as a whole, and for those who don't know, microgrids are basically any sort of distributed energy resources, so solar or wind, that has a storage component, so a battery, that then can be dispatched from the grid in the case of an emergency, and really be able to be kind of dynamic in that way and support the essential resources and needs of the community during an extreme weather event. So one of the ways that we have tried to prioritize that community feedback piece is having these proposed projects linked to anchor institutions such as a hospital or a community center or other places that impact the actual people of the community and not just the utilities, infrastructure itself. And so there is that kind of front-facing engagement for these projects that the state is funding. And we also are encouraging communities to partner with nonprofits and other community groups, really trying to take a more holistic approach to how we're funding these projects and not keeping it siloed on just the utility end. And, I think that impetus is really important for building out a more resilient energy system that is not just serving, some infrastructure vulnerabilities, which are very valid and real, but also serving the people that live in those communities and the vulnerabilities that they are experiencing as well.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to jump in on some of that or move to the next one? All right, she answered it thoroughly. All right, we'll move on to the second one. This one's for you, Sadie. In regard to strengthening the community's disaster resilience, can you talk more about the strategies you implement along with the resources needed before, during, and after a disaster and how critical community inclusion is to the process? And do you see any gaps to accessing information to these communities in which you serve as well?
Thank you. Yes, so what I do is I come in, what I've been doing is coming in with a shared language because sometimes we don't understand what the other person's saying, such as in public health and in human services. Really work with a social vulnerability index. Well, in emergency management, we don't do that on a regular basis, so we need to understand what does that mean. And so a lot of times in public health and human services, we use words like vulnerable population or people with disabilities, and in emergency management, we're looking to try to save life and property by getting resources to people in order to function before, during, and after emergencies. And what does that look like? So what I've done is help us create a shared language using a resource memory tool. And so in emergency management, we have those resources we need to get quickly to and from or to the community and understand what it is versus saying, hey, I'm a person with a disability. That doesn't help us in emergency management. However, we have shared language to understand that we need CMIST resources, CMIST. So we use communication resources, maintaining health and medical resources, independence resources, support services and safety resources, and transportation resources. All of a sudden, we have a shared language. You could relate with, hey, I use those on a regular basis, and yet I don't identify as a person with a disability. As our previous panel shared, the moderator shared that his child has asthma. Well, a lot of times us who have asthma or have diabetes don't identify as a person with a disability. So if we're only planning for people with disabilities, we still leave out those who don't identify as needing the resource in order to function through that, whatever that emergency or disaster is. And so being able to have a shared language that's plain and simple. I did not develop CMIST. Two disability consultants after Katrina did a deep dive into the after action report of who lost life and property, and those were people who needed access to those CMIST resources. So June Isaacson Kales and Alexandra Enders have been doing this since 2005, 2006, and all I'm doing is helping us better understand it in a shared platform. The barriers I do see is we just don't know what we don't know, and so it's always like, I don't know who those people are. Really being able to come back and say, hey, is it really those people or is it really we people? And so how do we keep that included and equitable? And by thinking of our resource needs in a CMIST framework, it eliminates looking at people in a demographic profile. It has us look at the actual resource need. And so transportation, all of you up here are really talking about those resources that people need no matter what, and being able to keep people with lived experience part of the conversation really helps us better understand together.
Excellent answer to that. I know that's a very equitable area and how you guys are moving about that. So next question is for Ms. Maria Angelica. In your position, you help to ensure equity is at the forefront of a scope development process. Can you talk a little bit more about the process and the strategies in which you use to ensure equity components are within the scope, and how do you ensure the community and stakeholders' needs are identified and addressed as well?
Thank you for the question. So I am the co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at the IT Mountain District, and I'm also the chair of the American Society of Civil Engineers Sustainability Committee for the Phoenix branch. So I am very interested in tying equity with sustainability and resilience for any project we in transportation do. So the answer to your question actually has two components. One of them is in the scoping or the planning of any transportation project, we have to define the scope of what we're going to do. So we look at what is the need of the project and what is the purpose of the project. They're two different things. So the need can be that we had a public request. It can be addressing an ADA complaint. It can be operation and maintenance. It can be various things or a component of all of them together. Also, the purpose. Are we placing a countermeasure? Are we doing any mitigation? What is the performance measure? We have to reach out. So once we define the scope or have a draft of scope, we don't finish there. What we need to do is, and that is the second component of what I'm going to say, is that we need to engage the people that we are serving, because in transportation, we serve everyone, anybody from our city or from cities adjacent to it can cross the road, so we have to engage everyone. We have to assess, so I use or I implement, because my brain forgets everything, so I need acronyms. The easy way is E for engage and events, A is for assessment, analysis, and evaluation, S is for strategic partnerships, coordination, and communication, and I is you. So what I do is I need to understand the community we're serving. And the only way that we can understand is by engaging them and creating events, not only personal events, but it can be virtual, to actually understand what's going on and what their needs are. Then we need to assess what we heard. We have to listen to the public to really analyze it, to define what the scope and the needs are. And then once we have a draft scope, we have to create strategic partnerships with not only the funding agencies, but also those that have a right-of-way, utility, or any constraint within that project. And then communication is essential for this, because we have to coordinate not only with the public, but with others that can be affected or benefited with the project. And lastly is you. Anyone that puts the scope together has to go out to the site, because going out to the site just opens your understanding of what the needs are. Go at night and see if there's a problem at night. Go when the kids are traversing your road. It is quite eye-opening.
Awesome answer to that. So, as we start to transition over to you, Deborah, in your position of ensuring projects start on time, on or under budget, and I'm gonna pause there for under budget. Design is complete, construction schedules are met, and closeout and seamless. Have you found it difficult for the construction industry as a whole to understand the value of equity within all aspects of the project? And are there any areas, opportunities you see in the process?
Sure, thank you. You gave me the loaded question. I appreciate it. And I think we're all aware that in the construction industry, minorities and women are still underserved. And it's our job as communities and cities and counties to continue to encourage the construction industry to hire, and to their benefit too, to hire minorities and women. So we have a Department of Economic and Development Opportunity. So we partner with a lot of the big contractors around town. We also working with the school districts, City and County of Denver School District, to have certification programs for our youth to encourage more people to get out in the community. Because the more women and minorities that we have come into the industry, we'll start to see the change, I think, from within. And be flexible enough to understand, if people take time off from work to raise families, and still encourage them to come back into the industry. But so Denver, similar to the DBE on the federal level, and we do a lot of local agency projects, and we do direct recipient projects. Denver has its own minority and women business enterprise goals, and also SBE goals to encourage small businesses as well, but we're here to talk about equity today. For even our planning studies, design, and construction, we always assign a goal. So we're encouraging the construction industry to hire a certain percentage, and it's generally around 20%, depending on the type of industry and the availability of minority, or the availability for subs for the prime contractors. So that's been very important. And also our DITO office with our larger projects, which is similar to like OJT, we also, I guess this is kind of on the second part, the opportunities and the process. So Denver, we're focusing on like the OJT, so both in the vertical and horizontal world. And in the horizontal world, it's been more difficult because it is harder to get those apprenticeships that are evident in the vertical industry. So especially in transportation, we started our larger projects, more than $10 million, all are assigned an OG or a workforce goal. So to encourage our contractors, a lot of the bigger contractors have their own apprentice programs already started. We've seen several of those. And then Denver's also looking for ways to partner with other contractors to continue that so that we can encourage them to bring work or new people into the industry.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
You're
All
welcome.
right, so we're going to kind of go into a tag team mode with some of these questions now. So Julie and Sadie are going to answer this question. When it comes to the communities of color, rural populations, and marginalized communities, how important is it for these communities to be educated on understanding energy and disaster vulnerabilities that may plague their city, their town, or their neighborhood? And what are some of the takeaways you think those here in the room can use to spread that message?
So,
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So when it comes to knowing our community, there's trust that becomes an issue, or trust in government, trust in community, economics become an issue, a barrier, isolation geographically, culturally, or socially become a barrier, capacity, we saw that in COVID, housing, whether we're traveling through, experiencing homelessness, those who live nomadic lifestyles, and racism become a problem. How we are trying to eat away at those influencers, those chronic influencers that get in the way of accessing resources, the CMIST resources during the bad day, is we're helping people identify what are your actual resource needs and building trust with community connectors. So somebody who's a champion who could get the information back and forth in emergencies and disasters to help ensure nobody is left behind. So we're trying to teach everybody to start using that CMIST resource in their preparedness, and then know what it is during, and then know what they need after, or as we're recovering from that. So that's how we're doing it at Office of Emergency Management in the program that I'm at.
Thanks. So for us at the Colorado Resiliency Office, as I think many of you know in the audience, the IIJA and IRA provisions have a lot of funding specifically earmarked for disadvantaged communities or J40 communities, and that's amazing. That's really important, but it's also the challenge to get that funding in front of those communities and really build up their own capacity to be able to go after it. And so that's a challenge that we're working through, and specifically for funding like the one that I'm running, the MCR program, a lot of communities in these rural parts of the state might not have a good grasp on the data metrics to support their vulnerabilities. They might know that their energy costs are very high, or there are blackouts often, or the wildfires get close to their homes and that's really scary, but translating that into grant writing materials is a challenge. And so one of the ways that we're doing that, we have been working to build up a mapping tool for our applicants to be able to representatively understand what their vulnerabilities are. So the state of Colorado has something called Colorado EnviroScreen. It's a number of different data indicators that show socioeconomic and climate vulnerabilities. And so we have layered that on with a Justice 40 data set, as well as FEMA data sets and other pieces of information so that applicants can have all in one place an understanding of what their community's vulnerabilities are. And there are some gaps in that. Like, for example, one of the climate vulnerability flags in the state of Colorado really overcounts things like wildfires and avalanches, and it undercounts drought. And so we know that a large portion of our state on the eastern front experiences a lot of drought, but if that's not represented in the data, if they're not meeting that threshold, but they have a lived experience of understanding that they are going through a drought, like there is a disconnect there. And us at the state, it's important for us to be able to help them bridge that gap, to be able to get funding to support drought mitigation. And so one of the ways we're doing that is by kind of giving a lot of different data points and trying to support applicants being able to craft a narrative for their own vulnerabilities that does represent the lived experience of what they're going through. One other piece I did want to mention is the state is doing things like applying for funding from the federal government on behalf of communities. So I've been working on a DOE grant that is specifically for rural communities under 10,000 folks. DOLA is applying on behalf of 3 of these sub-applicants, but we have taken on this charge to be able to better support and capacity build for these small rural communities that would probably not have gone after this federal funding to begin with because it is so resource intensive. It has so many reporting requirements. It's very intimidating. And so one of the ways that we are trying to support, the education about all of the funding that's out there and making it more equitable and actually going to the communities that need it most is by, if it's applicable and appropriate, being the intermediary there to be able to support building out their applications. So those are some of the ways that we've been doing that. I think a takeaway, as the second part of the question, is just really being aware of those capacity restraints. And if you are in a local government or an industry folk, being able to offer your technical expertise or support where needed to be able to best kind of uplift the rural communities or disadvantaged communities that we're trying to serve, instead of just kind of saying, well, if you guys can't get your grant application in, like, we're going to miss this opportunity. Like, there are other ways to circumvent that capacity issue that, us at the state are really trying to take advantage of this historic time of funding.
Excellent. I love the end of that statement as well. Second tag team question is going to be for Deborah and Marihelika. Can you both talk about the practices you and your organization have implemented to ensure inclusive contracting standards and practices are involved at each level of the transportation and infrastructure projects in which you guys deploy, which includes obviously the planning, the pre-planning, the design, all the way to construction? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. So I'll be blunt. I don't think being inclusive should be a matter just for some contracts. It should be addressed in all contracts. And so the contract that you use, it really depends on the type of funding, the type of service we have, the risk involved in any project or service we're doing, as well as the complexity. But inclusivity should be addressed in all contracts, in all services. So one of the things that we do at the City of Mesa is that we try to make everything competitive and include everyone. Everybody's invited to answer that competitive bid. It can be a bid for it. It can be an on-call. So the on-call list is developed based on the bids or the answers we get, as well as we do sometimes, if there are small amounts of construction, we use a JOC. But also those that are in our JOC list are those that have competed for the best, and we place them in the list. And they're only good for 3 or 5 years. If they do not perform, they're out the door and somebody else comes and replaces them. So being inclusive is important, but also being responsive and managing well the taxpayers' money is upfront for the city. So one of the ways that we do that is we make sure that our contracts follow federal, state, city codes and laws. And also we invite and include a very diverse pool. And we make sure that we advertise any bid opportunities, both in the newspapers and in the website. And we also invite DBE components, but we not only invite them, we make sure that we provide the resources because we want them to succeed. And we can only do that if we educate them, we know what their needs are, and we provide the resources so that they can improve within our city and our city can grow.
Thank you. Yeah, and we do a lot of the same things at the City and County of Denver, and we have outreach to our businesses, So we used to do bagels in business, where we bring large and small contractors together to come hear about projects that are going on in Denver. That was a monthly thing that I think we're getting ready to restart again, or have just started. We have mentoring goals as well. So we're encouraging the large contractors to mentor some of the smaller ones. And going back to our minority and women business zone, just for our local projects on our DBE goals, we also are encouraging all this. So we have even encouraged the large primes with a large maybe goal, to kind of sub or mentor a smaller or minority and women-owned business to be the prime on a design contract or even a construction contract. And that seems to be working well. We've done that in our 56th Avenue design build. The team structured that one was set up that way. But yeah, I think in setting up our projects and equity, so kind of going back to that planning level, it's like making sure we're focusing our funding in areas of equity and opportunity to make sure, and that we're focusing our communication in those areas, like the top 5, translating to the top 5 languages spoken in that area. We have many areas. We have 300 plus miles of no sidewalk gaps in Denver, and another 680 of deficient sidewalk that we're going to be addressing pretty quickly here in the next few years, and we've already started. So making sure that people have access to transit, and people that generally have been underserved do not have automobiles, that they can get to transit, they can actually have pathways. We have snow and ice here in Denver at all times of the year to have access. So starting back at that planning level with the right projects targeted to the right communities, even breaking our projects into smaller chunks so we can encourage our small business community to bid on projects to help develop them. So we try in all areas of our contracting to be equitable.
Awesome. And equity and also financial stewardship is a big piece to it. So rounding out, now we have our last 2 questions for the entire panel, so feel free to jump in, but I'll have Sadie start this one off. So a lot has happened within the last 2 to 3 years, obviously between COVID, a magnification of social inequities within the country. How is your work in which you do evolved? And if so, in what way has it evolved?
So what has helped us evolve is we're teaching the how-tos tied to all the must-tos that you had identified with ADA and all those laws that are out there, and showing and demonstrating that a plan with approach, community members with lived experience or support service providers will help us better understand what are the actual resources needed in that community, whether it's in a urban area or in a rural area, being able to know my community, and then help us prepare like nobody's coming, even though we know that will get help as soon as we need we know where our resource gap is, but it's prepare like FEMA's not coming, and being able to help a neighbor. We do that with where we're getting that shared language of what are my CMIST resources and how does it affect us in planning, organization, equipment, training, and exercising. And so, and when everybody is able to know what those resources are, then anybody could speak up, and then there's somebody who could help follow it along so nobody's left behind.
Thank you. Who would like to jump in?
I can go. I think that from the DOLA perspective, the abundance of funding from the federal stimulus is quite overwhelming for local governments and community groups, and it's hard to navigate. It's hard to know where you can fit in and where you can go after. And so I think my work has significantly increased around just condensing the abundance of information out there and getting it in front of the right people and getting them what they need in terms of technical assistance or other types of support so that they can, seek out that funding on their own. So really kind of a convener of all of that information and really organizing it for the betterment of localities.
Yes, so I would say that due to COVID, there's a lot of money available, but we want to make sure that we use that money in the right way. So we want to be inclusive. We want to understand that our society is composed of many different groups, and all the groups have different needs, and we need to understand what those needs are. But we in transportation understand that any project we do has a footprint not only affecting our community, but also we have to look at that our project will live 30, 50, maybe 100 years. And we don't have the money to just say, oh, it doesn't work, so let's bulldoze it and let's start something else. So we have to make sure that first we use the money in the right way and we make each project sustainable and resilient. And that is the message I want to get across to all. We need to make sure we use the money well and we make sure that our projects are sustainable, resilient, and not only do it the cheap way, do it the right way.
Excellent. Cool. Do you want to jump in? Or? Okay, we're almost out of time, so 30 seconds each. It's all good. All right, so to wrap up, a question for you all, once again. What continues to be a challenge for your organization when it comes to planning and executing equity programming? And do you want to start, or I'm sorry, do you want to start this one, Sadie?
Sure. One of the challenges that I want to address is that people are scared to make mistakes. Well, how do we learn? We learn through those mistakes, and as Andy from Aspen said, failing forward is a really good example of that. You know what? Let's at least take a risk. Let's put skin in the game, and when we learn from it, then we make the change, and we do that by making a plan, protecting the plan, or making the plan, working the plan, and protecting the plan, and keep moving that on. So, next.
So one of the challenges we work in transportation is safety. And so making sure that we streamline any process and we know really what is the cause of a safety problem and we address it full on.
And I think we have, a lot of resourcing issues across both the consulting and in government and in the construction industry. So I think that it's hard sometimes to remind ourselves that the resourcing issue doesn't overshadow the equity question. So that's why we really try in Denver to use that equity as a leveling playing field across all of our strategic plans and our visions and our goals across the city. So to be concise.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've kind of reinforced this point, but really just getting the funding opportunities in front of the right audiences, meeting communities where they're at, being able to support them with what they need to be able to be more resilient themselves, I think is the ongoing challenge and the goal for the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today in our elegant panel here and very passionate panel, and this was a great discussion. Thank you.